Hey, this is Daniel, and this is a tutorial on getting started with the pymax music system. We're going to do a really simple example. We're going to send events to Max from Python using a Python generator. Specifically, we're going to draw a sine wave in Max using a Python generator. So this is my Python screen here, where I'm going to write my Python code, and this is my Max screen where I'm going to put in my Max objects and get my output. And let's get started. The first thing I need to do in Python is import the math module, because I'm going to be using a little bit of math here, a little trigonometry, and then I'm going to define a generator function. I'm going to call it sine wave. Now, to send events to Max using a Python generator, I yield a list. And the first element in that list always has to be the on time. That's the time at which it's going to send Max this list, and Max is going to output everything else that's in the list, and it's going to output everything else in the list at the given on time. In pymax, on times can be in milliseconds or they can be in beats. And if they're in beats, then you can change the tempo. We won't do that here. We'll do that in the next tutorial. So for now, we're just going to be outputting the on time, which we haven't defined yet. That's why we have a little squiggly yellow line under it. And we also need to send out some other data. Now, the rest of the elements in the list can be whatever you want, and there can be as many of them as you want. In this case, I want to draw a sine function, a sine wave. So I just need to send it an x and a y value, where the x is time and the y is the amplitude of the sine wave. So I'll just write x and y in here. And now, of course, I have to define both of those. I also have to, this is pretty trivial generator, because at first it just yielded only one element. But now I've got a while statement in there, so it's going to just keep yielding these lists. So I'll set up initial values for my variables. My on time, I'm going to start with 0. That means it's going to start immediately. My x will also start at 0, and my y will also start at 0, because that's what a sine wave starts at the origin, 0, 0. But after it spits out that initial list, 0, 0, 0, then I have to update it. So my next list, for my next list, I'm going to update the on time by, say, 20 milliseconds. My x, how do I change that? Well, my x is the time axis, so my x is just equal to the on time. And then my y, that's the amplitude of my sine function. So I need to put in the formula for a sine wave. Let's make this sine wave move at 1 hertz. That is 1 cycle per second, 1 entire sine wave per second. So the formula for that is going to be math.sine. And then inside the sine function, I'm going to have 2 times math.pi. And then I'm going to give it my on time, which is in milliseconds, so I'm going to divide it by 1,000, because there's 1,000 milliseconds in a second. So to check that this function is correct, when my on time is 1,000, that means 1,000 milliseconds have passed, 1 second has passed. That means I'm going to be taking the sine of 2 pi, of 2 pi, which is correct. It's a full sine wave. When my on time is 500 milliseconds, half of a second, I'm going to be taking the sine of just pi, which is half of a sine wave, so that looks good. So this is my generator. This is all I have to do to send data to Max. Well, actually, there's one more thing I have to do. I have to enter this into the pymax system and set up the pymax system. So to do that, I'll make this module not a library, but an actual executable. How do you pronounce that word? So name equals main. So the first thing I have to do is import pymax. So from pymax music, import pymax. I have pymax music installed as a Python package. So I only have to do 3 commands here. First, I open pymax. There's no arguments to that. That just sets up the pymax system. Second, I'm going to add my generator. So the add generator function takes 2 arguments. First, it's the name, not the name of the class, not the name of the function, the generator function, the generator object, but how I'm going to call it from max. So I'll just call it, I can call it whatever I want. I'll call it sine. And then the second argument is my actual class name, which is sine wave. That's the name. I'm sorry, I'm saying class name. It's the function name, the generator function name, sine wave. So I'm passing it the generator function, sine wave, and I'm calling it sine. We'll see how that works in 1 second when we go to max. And then I just need to run pymax. No arguments there. So now when I run this module, if I haven't made any mistakes, I'm going to be able to control it with max. So we go over to max. I have to set a few things up. First, I'm going to set up my pygen object. The pygen object calls a generator that I've defined in Python and added to pymax. In this case, the pygen object takes two arguments. One, the time increment that we're using, and in this case we said it can either be milliseconds or beats. In this case we said it's milliseconds, so I'm just going to put in ms. Otherwise I would type in beats, B-E-A-T-S. And the second thing is the name of the generator as I've added it to pymax. So I'm not putting in sine wave here, I'm just putting in sine. Okay, so there's my pygen object. The pygen object, when I turn it on, and I turn it on with a toggle, is going to output every 20 milliseconds, because my on time keeps being updated by 20 milliseconds. It's going to output not this list, but everything except for the on time in the list. So it's going to output a list which is going to be made up of X and Y values. And that's a good format for me to send things into the function object, which takes X and Y values. So in this function object, it's going to draw in real time a 1 hertz sine wave. Let me set the domain and range up right. So let's say we'll go for 6 seconds. That's 6,000 milliseconds. And we'll set the range to be, the Y values will be just a little less than -1 to just a little more than +1, so we can see our output really clearly. So we'll set those. I'll also add a reset message. So I can send the reset message into the middle inlet in the pygen function if I want to start things over again. And if I do that, I'm also going to have to clear the function. If I reset it, if we want to see it again, I'm going to have to clear it. Okay. So we're all set up. We should be ready to go. All I need to do, save it. pymax tutorial 1. All I need to do now is run the Python module from, and it says pymax loop entered, press Control C to exit loop. So it's running. We have to run the Python module first because now Max knows that now Max is connected to Python. And so if we start the pygen object, there we go. It's drawing our sine wave. We can clear the Max object. We can reset the pygen object and it'll draw it again. So that's a really quick way to get started.